I think it's wonderful that you're doing this podcast, and I hope it reaches a lot of people, and people understand that there are people on the other side of the world who may look different, may dress differently, etc., may eat different things, but essentially we have a lot in common.
This is a podcast called Walk, Talk, Listen. An attempt to connect people and make this world a bit better by sharing opinions and experiences based on the belief that everyone's perspective is true, albeit partial. My name is Maurice Blom, and I would like to welcome you to yet another episode of Walk, Talk, Listen. Good day, everybody. This is another episode of the podcast Walk, Talk, Listen. I'm really delighted, as always, but extra delighted today because I have such a special guest finally we meet. We just found out after 20 years, maybe we see each other again. And she will introduce herself. Marina, please go ahead.
Hi, Maurice. Thank you for having me. I'm Marina Mahathir. I think of myself mostly as a writer, but I'm also an activist. I've been working on HIV/AIDS, and now mostly I work on women's rights, particularly Muslim women's rights in Malaysia and around the world.
And yeah, and I know you as an activist, actually, as heading the Malaysian AIDS Council, right, at the time.
That's right.
But tell us a bit about, I just read your book, so I know a bit about your life now, more than I used to. But tell the listeners, share a little bit about how, where you grew up, where you studied, and then how you ultimately became a writer and an activist.
Well, I'm from Malaysia. I grew up in a small town in the north of Malaya, called Alostar. And I lived there for most of my childhood until I was a teenager, before I went off to boarding school in another state, and then later on to England to do my A-levels and subsequently university. I always wanted to write. It was my favorite subject when I was a child, English. And I always dreamed of writing. But I started off as a reporter with a magazine, a women's magazine, when I came back from England. I worked there for a while, and then I went into public relations, and then long story. I left after I got married and went to live in Japan. But I think my work has always centered around communications and writing, and I think that helped me a lot when I became an activist. And I really became an activist by accident, pretty much. When I was in my 20s and I started work as a reporter, I didn't really know anything about various issues in Malaysia. But because we were doing these fundraising dinners and giving away to charity, I started to meet people who worked in NGOs and everything. And how I got into HIV was really by accident. I knew about HIV/AIDS, especially when I lived in Japan. And I thought I would do something, but I only thought of fundraising because that's what I had experience in. Mm-hmm. And it so happened that one day I got invited to join the Malaysian AIDS Foundation. They said there were not enough women on the board, and would I come and join? So I went along to an introduction dinner, and by the end of it, they had made me chair, which was a bit of a shock because I have never chaired anything before. But I took on the challenge, and that became a journey that was eventually took me 12 years. I started in 1993, and I only stepped down in 2005. And I was chairman of the foundation. And then I was president of the AIDS Council, which actually did the work. It was an umbrella body for, at that time, about 18 organizations working in HIV/AIDS. And I realized that, it's not just a matter of fundraising. It's not just a matter of raising people's awareness. It's also about making change, because it is some of the structures, the attitudes that are in place that was making it difficult for us to prevent people from getting HIV. A lot of stigma, a lot of prejudice, a lot of ignorance. And so I became an accidental activist. I started talking about things. I saw the injustices that were happening on the ground among marginalized groups, among refugees, migrant workers. And I thought, this is not right. How do we protect all of society if we are discriminating against certain sectors of society? So I started talking, and then suddenly there I was,
Yeah.
in the media saying things which may not have been very popular at the time, especially with the government. But there you go. It needed to be done.
So, and we will go slowly to the last book that you wrote, which was, which is about yourself, but also about your relationship with your dad. But so how was it for you? Because you were just alluding to the fact that some of the things that maybe the government didn't like what you were doing, or but you were, your dad was in charge of the country. So tell a little bit about, was there then tension when you came home? How was that?
Yeah, it was a bit of a strange situation, because there I was, the daughter of the prime minister. And obviously, when my colleagues invited me to join the foundation, that was the role that they saw me as, to sort of give the foundation some sort of, I don't know, prestige, maybe. They didn't realize, and I didn't realize, that I could work, and that I had, my own ideas of what needs to be done and that sort of thing. Even I didn't know. I mean, I really grew into it, I must say, the more I learned about the issues related to HIV. I must say that I didn't have so much problems with my dad. I never, I never criticize him personally, because he's the government. So I always talk about the government, and the main ministry that I dealt with was the Ministry of Health, of course. But my dad is a doctor, so he understands medical issues and all that very easily. The things that were a bit more difficult for not just him but almost entire government to understand were the social issues related to HIV. That we have a society that is diverse, and we're not separated from each other with high fences or anything. People go in and out of different groups, which is what allows HIV to also go in and out of different groups. And so that really was the battle that I had to fight. And also we could see what was happening in the rest of the world, and we knew it was coming. Like, for instance, women, our first cases were almost all men. There were hardly any women, but we could see it was happening in other countries, so it was going to come. But in the early days, they said to me, well, when we have a problem with women, then we'll let you know. There's no such thing as prevention is better than cure, but so that's why I had to speak louder and bring up these issues and call people out when I thought they were being obtuse.
Yeah. in the book you described that you really thoroughly were preparing yourself and your team in a meeting with your dad, and so that I think that's for me, at least when I was reading it, a significant point, because maybe it was because I know how important you were for the work on HIV/AIDS, not only in Malaysia itself, but in the whole region, if not the world. So that particular moment in the book where you describe that is for me significant in terms to understand your relationship with your dad. So I found it fascinating, because you are his daughter, but you have this. He was expecting a lot from you, and at least that's what I got from the book.
Yes.
Yeah, so maybe you can tell about how you felt when you were preparing for the meeting and then have the actual meeting, because that was I think an important moment for the work that you were doing in your relationship with the government, and to get support for necessary actions after that.
Yeah. Well, like you said, my dad expects a lot from me, so he expects me to be on point, if I'm presenting anything to him. But similarly, also with anyone who's doing any presentations to him, they have to be extremely well prepared, because he's very, very sharp. So if he asks a question and you don't know the answer, then you're in real trouble. And I've been, in meetings before with him where it's a bit nerve-wracking, to say the least. So this one, because particularly I was leading our little group to go and meet him. We had been waiting for 9 months for this meeting. And as you can see, I didn't pull any strings to get a faster interview. And so, we really wanted to make the best of that opportunity. We felt like we had only one shot to really, present our case and how the AIDS response needed to be better in Malaysia and all that. So we had a kind of rehearsal, group everybody and like, okay, you talk about this, you talk about this, you talk about this. And we had that idea of bringing our secret weapon, which was a person with HIV, a woman. And I really wanted to bring the whole issue down to a very human level to my dad, because to me that's the only way. I mean, that's what convinced me in the first place when I met my first HIV positive person. And I think if everybody did, and I've seen it happen many times, and people actually meet an HIV positive person and it just blows apart any stereotypes they might have, then they change. So we brought along with us Miss L, who was a teacher, very ordinary young woman who got infected by her partner, and all the struggles of getting treatment, etc. And I think that really did it. I mean, we went there to talk about the economic impact of AIDS, because I figured he would understand the economic side. I didn't have to bother with the medical side, I knew. But what it does to human resources, to the workforce, but also to bring it down to a very, very human level. And I know he was really surprised. I noted his eyebrows went up like, oh, this is what a person with HIV looks like just anybody. And I think that really had a great impact, really great impact on him. And in a speech about 2 weeks later, he actually talked about some of the issues that we mentioned. So yeah, that was a pivotal moment for us. I think we were lucky, not because I had my father as PM, but we had a PM who understood these type of issues and was willing to listen, which is not always the case.
Yeah, I would like to go back to, the beginning of the book. And so you ask your dad about what does mediocre mean.
Yeah.
And I was just astonished by his answer, because I know what you have been doing and what you're still doing. And he said to you, it's like you. Did he try to make a point there to motivate you? Was that it? Or was that his real assessment at that time? And then the other one is, what if you would ask the question now to him, what would he tell you now?
Well, I think you have to remember that I was about 13, 14
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
at that time when I asked him. And so
Mm-hmm.
obviously at that age, you haven't really done anything.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely in school, I hadn't excelled in anything really. I was not a sports person, not particularly academic, never won any prizes, nothing. So I had nothing to show for myself. And so I think his assessment of me at the time was probably accurate, but I think he also meant to spur me, because it made me think, oh, I don't want to be mediocre if it means I'm not much of anything, I think that was the intention. But I remember it so well that,
Yeah.
to this day, 50 years later, I still remember it.
Mm-hmm.
I guess if he looked at me now, he would grudgingly admit that I may have made something out of my life.
Mm.
People always come to me and say, what is it like to be Dr. M's daughter? And which is why I wrote the book. The book is called The
Yeah.
Apple and the Tree.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been dying for someone to go and ask him, what is it like to be Marina's father? That would be a nice change. But I do have a funny story that I was in Geneva for the big World AIDS Conference, and I was on a panel talking about I think it was the economic impact of AIDS or something. And the moderator was Justice Edwin Cameron from South Africa. And you know how, judges are so good at summarizing at the end of it. And you also know that in the AIDS world, it is very safe to call everybody doctor, because they're either a medical doctor, a scientist, or a PhD or something. It's safe. If you don't really know them, just call them doctor. So Justice Cameron was summarizing, and he kept saying, and Dr. Mahathir said this, and Dr. Mahathir said that. And I was listening to him and thinking, when did Dad say that? And then I realized, no, he's talking about me. I'm Dr. Mahathir, So I came home and told my dad, you're not the only Dr. Mahathir in the world, and he
That's
was like,
funny.
oh, eyebrows shot up, like, what? So yeah. So I think he has said some nice things about me lately. He's also got a book out. And he sort of credited me for pushing him in some areas and giving him some advice. Although at the time I didn't think he listened to me, but yeah, it's nice to know later on.
Great. Marina, why? Because I was, this is your fourth book, right?
Yes.
I was thinking when I was reading it, and I was like, why didn't you write this book earlier in your life?
Well, I think lack of confidence, really. My previous books were all compilations of my column. I've been writing in the Star newspaper for well over 30 years.
Yeah.
And so I had a lot of columns, and we compiled them into 3 books. And that was okay. I thought that was a bit too easy. And I was writing columns which were very short, 800 words, 1,200 words, and I wasn't very satisfied with it. And I really, really wanted to know how to write long form, how to write a long book. I really admire people who write books of, 300 pages or whatever. And so I always talk to authors and say, how do you do that? How do you do that? And they tell me, but it's unless you really experience it, I think you don't really know. So I actually decided to go and take a course. After 40 years after my undergrad, I took a master's in creative writing in the UK and learned how to write a book. So that's really why. Partly also because all this time I thought I to write a book I need to sit down quietly somewhere, go away somewhere, and all these excuses. Actually, they're all excuses. And so finally, I went for this course, and after that, I got really, motivated. I was writing bits and pieces, but I didn't know what to do with it. And then, by chance, Penguin uh, contacted me and said, "Would you like to write a book for us? We want you to write about the experience of being your father's daughter." And I thought, perfect. And
Yeah.
so that was it. And that's how the book came out. It's partly the stars were aligned
Mhm.
correctly, I guess.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I definitely can, recommend it to anybody who I think it's really well written. Yeah. So a lot of kudos for that.
Thank you.
What do you hope that people get from the book? After reading, what do you hope?
Well, firstly, I hope they think, oh, she can write.
Mhm.
Secondly, I think I think when people in my position, in public figures and all that, people think that what they read in the paper is everything. That they know everything about us,
Mm.
just from the media. And I wanted to bring it down to a more human level, that we are human beings and we have a lot of the same issues that anybody would have in their families and in everyday life. Undoubtedly, I've had a very privileged life,
Mm.
though not from childhood exactly. Um, a lot of people keep asking me, what was it like growing up as the Prime Minister's daughter? And I had to remind them that my father became Prime Minister when I was 24 and I was a full grown adult
Mhm.
already.
Mhm.
So my childhood was quite ordinary, like most people, and we had no inkling, none whatsoever, that he was going to end up where he did, and for so long. Also, I think that it's an experience that needs to be talked about because
Mhm.
it's pretty unique. I mean, we've had 8 prime ministers now, I think. And but my dad was there the longest,
Yeah.
22 years, plus another two, which meant that his family were also there longest
Mm.
and had to put up with, having to share him with the nation, having to be in the public eye, plus the fact that I also carved my own space
Mm.
in the public arena, right? So that I thought that I had a story to tell and I wanted to tell it. I didn't tell everything because there was just too much,
Mm.
that I had to leave out. I just put in things that moved the story along.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, it's been an incredible life. I'm very grateful for it. But I just wanted to share it really.
Mm. So
Yeah.
can we can expect a second book if you still have a lot of additional information?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm thinking. I
Mm.
don't want to be just writing about me all the time.
Mm.
I'm thinking of possibly a novel fiction
Okay.
because it was so hard to write nonfiction.
Mm.
Nonfiction has to be real and
Mm.
true. And fiction, you can get away with inventing some things. So I'm thinking about it, but let me get over this one first.
I explained to you, how this podcast came about. It is a result of me walking 100 mile in a week, 15 to 20 miles per day, to raise,
Incredible.
awareness about hunger, poverty, and injustice. If you would be asked to walk 100 miles in a week, for which cause would you, do it?
I think definitely against violence against women,
Hmm.
because there's so many issues to talk about: child marriage, sexual harassment, all those things. Those are issues that we are fighting for here in Malaysia, and I think it's also something that's still being fought all over the world. I think I would do that for that cause. Yeah.
You know, when I walk with people during those events, we often talk about, you know, life, what drives you, and then very actually quickly religion and spirituality come up.
Mm.
And what I'm fascinated with is the conversations then you know, turn into what do you see within your environment happening with the younger generation? How do they are they still religious? Are they still spiritual? So if I ask you, what do you see among, you know, the younger generation in your community? What do you see? Is that similar to when you grew up? Is it different? Can you a little bit reflect on that?
It's quite different actually. I find that there are two groups of young people that I see nowadays. One is the group that is very aware, very what they call woke nowadays, and they want to do something. They want to do something about the environment. They want to do something about discrimination. They want to do all sorts of things, changing politics, for example, and they've been quite effective. For instance, we've now managed to lower the voting age to 18
Mm,
from 21, where it has been for 60 years. And that's totally the work of young people in this country. And it's
mm,
great. It's going to change the political landscape, I think. So there's a lot of them. And when it comes to spirituality, I think a lot of them are less interested in organized religion, but more
mm,
interested in expressing spirituality in other ways. For example, in charity, in helping others, in protecting the environment, that sort of thing. Like we've had terrible floods
mm,
recently. You might have heard horrible, horrible. We've never had such bad floods. And really, it's been the young people mobilized so quickly to go out and help people, you know, food and things, and rescuing people on boats and whatever. It's been them. So that's really one group of young people that I see. But there's also another group, and I think this is the result of our education system, which has been very, very, you know, the type that you just listen, you don't ask questions, you don't ask difficult questions, etc., etc. So there's a whole generation, several generations of young people who've just been taught to obey and follow and don't question. And then those become very, very conservative. And
mm,
so that's kind of worrying, especially it's very male. And the attitudes towards women is not very, very positive at all. They feel defensive, etc. Whereas our young women, you know, there are more women in the universities than there are men, and they're going out there and they're being entrepreneurs and everything, and they're doing great. And so I think we're setting up for a kind of a clash, a gender clash soon, if if we don't change things
mm,
and make everyone feel secure and safe, you know.
mm,
So yeah, I this is what I see right now, and I don't know which group will win out. I'm hoping
mm,
for the more progressive group, obviously.
mm.
Yeah.
And is that something that is typically for, you know, happening in Malaysia, or because I, you know, you also are still often going to Indonesia, so maybe you have observations what's happening there and other countries. Is this so? My question is it Do you think it's typical, what you just described, is that typically Malaysia, or do you see it happening in other countries as well?
Um, well, I think I'm describing mostly Malaysia.
Mm-hmm.
Indonesia is nearby, but not entirely the same. Partly because um, I don't think religion has been politicized as much as it has been in Malaysia. In Indonesia, it's coming though. And I would put outside influences as the source of it. But over there, people seem to be more open. Um, and they are, and partly because they're people, Indonesians, although the majority are Muslims, they also have substantial numbers of Christians and everything. And because they all look the same, you can't tell who is who unless you really know. So in one family, you could have a whole mixture of different religions. Whereas in Malaysia, religion is very much tied to race, and that is a big problem. And the politicians, unfortunately, have been using this race religion thing to really stir up things in Malaysia. I mean, I think if you walk every day around the country, people are not bothered. People are not bothered. We are so used to living in this multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multicultural society that we are not really fussed about a lot of things. I was just in Langkawi Island for a holiday, and I was sitting in a restaurant on the beach watching the sunset, and you see girls in bikinis next to girls in the hijab. And, the girls in bikinis are drinking beers, the girls in hijab are drinking orange juice, and nobody bothers, right? Nobody bothers. Everyone is fine.
Mm.
But if you talk to politicians, it's like, oh, this is terrible. And, so it's really whether our people have more sense than the politicians, really, which I think generally I think they do. And we've seen the failure of the politicians when it comes to disasters like the floods. It's the people who've mobilized, and not our so-called leaders, because if all their capital is about race and religion, it doesn't help when your house is flooded, right? It doesn't. And you can't sort of decide, I'll only help this house and not that house. It really makes you look terrible. So yeah, so I think that's Malaysia has this problem, and it's very up and down. But we have survived 64 years, and I'm fairly optimistic with the young people coming in, taking leadership roles. I'm optimistic that it will change. It will really change.
There are several things that worry you, but my question is, what worries you most at the moment that's happening in the world?
In the world, I think it's a lack of sensible and rational leadership in so many countries. I don't know why people don't listen to science. In managing the pandemic, particularly in just doing the sensible thing. I have to say that in Malaysia, despite the poor leadership that we've had, there have been sensible voices, and we have, despite a slow start, we have had management of the pandemic that's been quite good. We now have something like 98% of adults vaccinated. I got my booster yesterday, in fact. And everyone goes around in masks. There's no not wearing masks. Everyone just does. It's become normal, and we're now into fashionable masks and things like that. So it's become normalized. So and I think that's how our numbers are slowly going down. And we're not afraid to clamp down on things. For instance, because of this Omicron, we found that pilgrims who went to Mecca for the Umrah, for the little pilgrimage, have come back with Omicron. So the government has just said, okay, no more going for that right now, because for the safety of everyone. And that, I think, is the sensible and rational thing to do. So I don't know. I think in Malaysia, we're still concerned about the community as a whole. And so we will do whatever to help the whole community, and that's what worries me. My daughter is going back to the UK and to Ireland soon, and I feel very worried. Although I know she's very, very sensible and she's got all her shots and everything, but it is worrying because all her friends have got COVID, all her friends. Where do I still see hope? I do believe in young people, as I said, but particularly young women. I think, you see female leadership in so many areas, and they're doing very well, from Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand to Greta Thunberg to Malala. And I see some young women here who are leading businesses and NGOs and everything. And that's where I see hope, really. They're more motivated, they're more community minded, they're more detailed. And, they're very sensitive to everything, and they want to, make sure everyone's okay. So I think that's the hope for the future.
That's great. That's great to hear. My organization celebrated its 75th anniversary in 2021. And so, it's also a time we use that to reflect on what did we do well and what not. And a big topic we are a US organization, but I think it's relevant for all organizations, is racial justice and how did we do. So if I ask you to give a grade to the NGO sector as a whole, how did the NGO sector do around racial justice or racial injustice, according to you? And I know it's difficult to generalize, but I'm going to ask you it anyway to, kind of reflect on that.
Well, I can really only speak about Malaysia. I have to say that, racial equality, racial justice is a big issue here in Malaysia. Maybe not quite in the same way as in the US, but yeah, we are talking about structural injustices, etc. And really, it's been the NGO sector that has brought up the issues, really, more than the government side. Although there are some NGOs that are, like in the US also, affirming the supremacist idea of things. But I think we've been pushing along things quite a while, particularly for the Orang Asli, the Aboriginal peoples, the indigenous people, for our different communities in Borneo, and also for our three major groups, which is Malay, Chinese, and Indians, who make up the main ethnic groups in Malaysia. And I think people now are really tired of all these divisions, and are really beginning to understand that it's not a zero-sum game, that everybody should benefit, and everybody can benefit from more justice. It's very clear that we are seeing there are groups of people who are dying in police custody more than others. There are people who are getting arrested more. There are people who are, getting, less places in universities despite having the right qualifications. And it works all around. Yeah, it's not just the, one-sided. there are people who say they'll only take intendants who speak a certain language and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of work to be done. But I think the key to it is to actually talk about it. And we've had for a long, long time an understanding, I guess, that we don't talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
That we because it's too sensitive. And I've always said that there's nothing that is too sensitive. It's just whether you have a sensitive approach to it or not.
Mm.
And that's the way to handle things. I think we need to have things come out in the open to deal with them. And that's the challenge for us in Malaysia right now. And I think it's the NGOs that are pushing it. Even from the other side, the right wing side of it, because they are making so much noise, then they actually help to raise the issue too. And that's good. They haven't managed to put a lid on it. That's the point. Yeah.
Okay, great. No, and I really resonate with what you said. I mean, one of the reasons that I have this podcast, it's called Walk, Talk, Listen, right? And I really believe that listening is we do need to do more listening, first of all.
Yeah.
And then you often see that, nobody can be wrong all the time. So there is always, a start where you can start a dialogue, and that could be beginning of understanding and peace. So thank you for sharing that. I would like to talk about music because that's so close to my heart. And the question that I always ask is, if I ask you to name a piece of music or a song that best embodies what you are about, what song or piece of music would that be, and why?
Oh gosh, that's really difficult. There's so much music out there. I don't know. But I must say, I've just been watching this documentary on the Beatles called Get Back, how they recorded this album. And I was really, I never thought I was a big fan, but when I watched it, I had a real appreciation of the process of music making.
Yeah.
And I really love the story behind Let It Be. That, that sometimes if you are fussing and, working yourself up over small things, it actually doesn't help anyone, least of all you. So there are many things that you can just let it be and work on the really important things in life. So I guess at the moment, the song that I can think of is Let It Be by the Beatles.
Right. Yeah. And I do agree with you. People should check out that documentary it's called Get Back. It's 8 hours, but it's really worthwhile,
yes.
Listening and see the dynamics between, all the 4 band members and the other people who are involved as well. So, and then the music is great in how the different songs develop as well. Marina, I'm very passionate about talking about this 17 Sustainable Development Goals. They might not be perfect, but at least they, as a world, we set some goals. If I ask you to say something about the Sustainable Development Goals, what is it that you would like to share? About lift up one specific goal or anything in relation to the SDGs.
Well, of course, in the work that I do, which is women's rights, we've mainly been focused on SDG 5, which is all about women's rights. And I'm not sure there's as much consciousness as there needs to be about SDGs here in Malaysia, but certainly among NGOs and even some government agencies, there is plenty. And SDG 5 gives us some aspirations that we would like to achieve. So we've been working hard particularly on ending child marriage and raising the age of marriage. A lot of resistance, recently, the Minister for Religion, which means Islamic religion, said there's no need to raise it beyond what it is now, which is 16 for women. And that's disappointing. So there's a lot of work still to be done. And also, with the COVID pandemic, actually, we've seen an uptick in young marriages, child marriages, and that sort of thing as a way of solving some of the economic problems that have arisen because of it. We're also working on sexual harassment. There's been a bill that's supposed to be tabled in Parliament. It was originally tabled in the government that won in 2018, the one that my father led, and then of course the government fell in 2020, and they've gone silent. But they said that they're going to table it in the next Parliament sitting. So we shall see how far it goes. But I know the NGOs are a little disappointed with what they've seen of the draft, that a lot of things that they wanted are not in it. And there's still, a lot of other things that need to be done. I am part of a group called Sisters in Islam. We work on laws and policies that particularly affect Muslim women in personal laws, marriage, divorce, inheritance, guardianship, that sort of thing. We've had one victory, I must say, recently, that for all Malaysian women. Previously, Malaysian women who are married to non-Malaysians and had their children overseas could not pass their citizenship to their children, which has caused a lot of hardship for women who are, say, widowed or divorced and want to come back and live in Malaysia with their children. That's been a real problem. And this group of women took the government to court and said it was unconstitutional. They won. And the government is appealing. I don't know why. It's such a silly thing to appeal. But the court has been reaffirming the right of these mothers. So that is one major victory in 2021, which is great. It's a bit late for me because I have a half French child who was born overseas in Japan. So she's not Malaysian. But it's okay. It's okay. It's not just about me. It's really about all these other women.
Yeah.
And with the world being so global now, people traveling, you're going to marry someone from another country, and you're likely to have children born overseas. So this is a very fundamental right that we should have, because the men have it. Men can have their children anywhere in the world. They can pass on their citizenship to their kids, but we can't. So this was great. So one highlight for 2021. And I think the right to citizenship, it's also child rights and everything. So we're very happy about that.
Great. Yeah. So that's SDG 5. You start, I don't know how many years ago, was it 6 years ago that you started the website, where you focus on traveling of women, and then you also have podcast around books you read, right?
Yeah.
Is it 6 years ago?
2014 we started. It's called zafigo.com.
Yeah. Okay, I will make sure that we make a link to it in the podcast notes. What I wanted to ask you about is, because you host a podcast yourself as well, where you talk about books. And so the question that I have for you is, what is the book that people should definitely read in 2022?
Oh,
outside of your book, so.
Oh, that's hard because there's so many books. I don't think it has to be a new book, but I can talk about some of my favorite books. The two books that I always mention because I just love them, and funnily enough, they are both about women and their fathers.
Okay.
One is Educated by Tara Westover, which was a big hit. And the other is a book called Dadland by Keji Carew, who talked about her father, who was in Force 136, which was the special forces during World War II, who went into Burma to help the Burmese against the Japanese. We had Force 136 in Malaya too. And I think both books fascinated me about, father-daughter relationships and how sometimes it's very, very difficult and what do you need to overcome it. And particularly for Tara Westover, this strange family that she grew up with, and not going to school and not really being educated, but somehow that desire to learn was so strong that, spoiler alert, she got a PhD. But, this sort of, you can see her journey as she learned more and what it revealed about her own family and things like that. And Keji Carew is very interesting because she's telling it from the present, dealing with a father who has dementia and finding out about his past, which he never talked about, and the contrast between his adventurous past and his current, where he's really losing it. So if you've never read these two, please do, because I think they're great. And I'm sure they'll be great books.
So my last question to you is, do you have a message, an invitation, or a question for the listeners?
There's a talk I like to give when I go to schools and talk to school children, which is, the world is big, the world is small. And I don't know whether adults even understand that, that, yeah, the world is huge. There are all sorts of people in the world. We have so much diversity, so much culture, different cultures, different ideas, different norms and everything everywhere in the world. And we need to understand that diversity, and that diversity is not a bad thing. On the other hand, the world is small because we are so connected these days, and there's so much that we have in common. We're actually watching the same things, listening to the same things, reading the same things, and our ideas are the same. I mean, you go into the deepest part of Malaysia, and people have heard about Beyonce, Michael Jackson, whoever. I'm sure they even didn't expect that. So, and it's not just on that pop culture basis. I think mothers all over the world, for instance, want the best for their children, want their children to grow up to be confident, solid human beings who, have good judgment, that sort of thing. So we have all these things in common. And I think we need to be able to talk about these common things while we are appreciating the diversity. So I think it's wonderful that you're doing this podcast. And I hope it reaches, a lot of people, and people understand that there are people on the other side of the world who may look different, may dress differently, etc., may eat different things, but essentially we have a lot in common. Yeah. That's
Great.
my message, I guess.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much for your willingness to talk with me today and to share your knowledge and experiences. I really invite people to check out your new book.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for everything you do, and good luck. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Maurice. Thank you for having me on your podcast. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's the same. Sama-sama, we say, right? So
That's right.
Thank you for listening to Walk, Talk, Listen. Please check us out on 100mile.org or follow us on Facebook or Instagram.